Now, I'm not going to back up and read anything. I know that's hard to believe, but I'm not. What I am going to do is just remind you that at the end of chapter 31, Laban and Jacob have worked out their differences. They have decided to part ways. And if you'll remember, they set them up a remembrance to their commitment to not argue and fight anymore. I'm going to go this way, you're going to go that way, and we're going to set this pillar up at Mizpah as a witness between us. So that's what they did. And they're at Mount Gilead. Jacob's almost home. He don't lack, but it's under 200 miles because it's 300 miles from Padan Aram to Mount Gilead. He's somewhere in that mountain range, so something under 200 miles. All he lacks getting home. Now that's a long way, especially back then. But he's more than halfway there. When we find Genesis chapter 32 verse 1, that's what's going on. The Bible says Jacob went on his way and the angels of God met him. Now, this is what I think happens here. Remember that he's got more people with him than just him. When he came to Padan Aram, he was alone. Now he's got his family. He's got all his boys, his little girl, his wives, his servants, men servants and maid servants, his animals, and he's got, I don't know how many flocks and things, but apparently he's the only one that sees the angels of God. And what it reminds me of, y'all remember the story in 2 Kings chapter 6, I think verses 16 and 17, and you don't have to turn there. I've referenced this a lot. You'll remember Elisha tells his servant, those that be with us are more than those that be against us. And this servant is freaking out because he looks out the window and the Assyrian army is just, I mean, they're out there everywhere. They've got them surrounded. So it's Elisha and a servant and an army around him, and this servant's freaking out. And you can turn there if you want to and read this for yourself, but it's in 2 Kings chapter 6. Anyway, Elisha tells him, hey, those that be with us are more than they that be with them. And he don't know what he's talking about, so Elisha prays, says, Lord God, open his eyes, that he may see. And the servant looks out again, and the angelic host, reveals itself to them. Now, they had the ability to kill every last man of the Syrians. They could have killed them all. But they didn't. They struck them with blindness and lead them off. But the point is, when God so chooses, He can reveal to us the host that is around us.
Amen.
I believe that there is a spiritual realm that you just cannot imagine on your best day. Of angels and cherubim and seraphim and I don't know what all God's created, but there is a whole spiritual host we can't see. I believe there's probably angels all around us all the time. And I hope there's some in here singing with us when we sing. I don't know. I can't see them. But I just happen to believe that. And the Bible tells us there are angels. Where they are, I don't know. I don't see them. But there are occasions in Scripture. There's several actually. But there's occasions in Scripture where the Lord allows angels to be seen. Sometimes they come in the form of a man. Like in Lot's case and Sodom and Gomorrah. But not always. But in this first verse of chapter 32, Jacob's on his way home and the angels of God meet him. And verse 2 says, when Jacob saw them, he said, this is God's host. And he called the name of that place Mahanaim. Now Mahanaim means two hosts. Now why would he name that two hosts? I can't hear you. Maybe. Any other ideas?
That's just what I think.
That's fine. Anybody else? Why would he call it two hosts?
It says two camps, two different.
Mine says double camp.
Double camp.
Double camp, two hosts. I don't think there's a lot of difference in those two understandings. I looked it up. I've got a Hebrew lexicon, but it means double means two. Camp, host can be the same thing. But okay, double camp. What does that mean? What's he talking about?
Angels and the people.
Thank you. That's what I think too. Remember, he's got his whole host of his family with him. He's got a pretty good host himself. And I think that made him feel a lot more protected than when he was crossing through there the first time by himself. But now he's crossing through there with his people, which, I'm sure he felt a little more protected with all those servants and animals around him to protect him from whatever they encounter. But even better than that, now there's a host of angels that met him. And he understands God's with him. Look, he knew that already. Sometimes God will send you a reminder, hey, I'm with you. Don't fear, don't fret. You don't have to be scared. You know, the Bible says be anxious for nothing. He's with you. So he reveals himself to show Jacob that he's with him when he parts from Laban. I want to point this out too. As he's going away from Laban, bless you. Do you need a Kleenex?
I've got one.
Okay. Bless you.
Out of your nose, what do you mean? That's fine.
I'm sorry, that tickled my funny bone. I don't even know what I was saying. Does anybody know what I was saying? Oh, goodness. No, as Jacob's leaving from his uncle Laban, I want you to note that he's heading away from one, I wouldn't say enemy, but opponent, opposition. He's headed toward another. What's back home?
Brother Esau.
Esau hated him enough to want to kill him. So in a way, as he's headed away from Laban, who was on his way there to kill him, he's headed toward Esau, who as far as he knows, still wants to kill him. He's really got nowhere to go, does he? He can't go back. But the Lord's with him. And I think that's why God appeared to him in the form of these angels, was to say, I'm with you. It's going to be okay. And I think that Laban and Esau represent the world and the flesh. The Laban represents outside world. See, you've got an enemy there in the promised land. You got an enemy there behind you outside the promised land, on the other side of the Jordan River. And think about this. As we live through this life, we've got that world out there to worry about.
Yeah.
And sometimes amongst God's people, we got some folks we got to worry about. Isn't that sad?
It is. Yeah.
Isn't that sad? But sometimes that's the one you got to worry about them even worse. Sometimes it's your own brethren you got to worry about. I think this represents the world and your flesh, which both can be a barrier or an opponent to our serving God. We've got our own flesh to worry about because we fail in our flesh and we desire things in our flesh. And we've got the outside world to worry about, who, if they have their way, are going to lead us entirely away from God to begin with. So there's a picture here of the same struggles that we have today, Jacob's got. And what do? Well, if I've got to choose between the world and my brother, I guess I'm heading toward my brother, right? So this is what he does. But he calls that place Mahanaim. And Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau his brother unto the land of Seir, the country of Edom. It wasn't named that yet, but in Mount Seir, which is near modern-day Jordan, where Petra, those of you who know where Petra is famous. That's the area that Esau lives in. And he's headed in that direction. Verse 4. He commanded them, saying, Thus shall ye speak unto my lord Esau. Thy servant Jacob saith thus, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed there until now. Let me remind you as we pause for a moment. He says, I stayed there till now. Do you remember what his mama told him? Anybody?
She'd call for him
You're right, go ahead. She'd call for him when
it was the time to come back.
When she felt like his brother wasn't out to kill him anymore, she'd call for him. Well, as far as we know, as the Bible records, she hasn't called for him. So he doesn't know what he's walking into. I do believe he had gotten word his father was still alive, because in the last chapter he says something about going home to his father. I don't remember which verse, but somewhere in chapter 31 it mentions Isaac by name. So I think he knew his father was still alive, but I don't know if his mother, if he knew if she was alive or not. So anyway, he's headed home, and he hadn't been called for yet. So he's sending this message to his brother, hey, here I come. And I think he figured if I let him know I'm coming and give him time to, consider what he wants to do, maybe it'll help to set his mind in the right place. But he told him to speak to my Lord, and he calls him that on purpose, my Lord. And say, thy servant, Jacob, saith thus. I think that as Jacob has gotten older and wiser, I think he feels somewhat guilty for the way that he and his brother got along. Just like sometimes we do. You have a family member that you haven't always got along well with, and you realize maybe sometimes it was your fault. Maybe there's things you could have done different. I think Jacob's thinking about how the birthright, God would have given it to him. He didn't have to try to take it the way he did. And the blessing, God would have given it to him. God would have made sure that his promise was kept. So I'm not going to say it's all Jacob's fault, because Esau wasn't a good guy to start with. But I think Jacob's not focusing, and this is something Christians need to do today. Stop focusing on everybody else. Focus on you. You say, well, but they did me dirty. Hey, they did Jesus dirtier.
Amen.
Ain't nobody ever done you as dirty as they did our Savior Jesus Christ.
Right.
I've had people stab me in the back, but you know what? I've never had anybody spit in my face and pull my beard off. I shaved this by choice. Nobody pulled it out. So, I mean, think about it. I don't care how ugly anybody's been to you, nobody's ever been as ugly to you as they were to Jesus. And so instead of focusing on what other people have done wrong, we need to focus on ourselves. One of the reasons I did this is because I hate shaving. I want you to understand something. I hate razors. I hate them. I have this thing, I get these razor bumps that are like little bitty baby pimples that go everywhere every time I shave, and it makes me so mad that I have to fight with that. It's actually gotten better as I've gotten older, but it used to be every time I shave, those things would pop up, and they're so gross. And I mean, and then, you know, I've got to be seen in public like that. And I hate shaving. I hate razors. But I got to thinking about this. Instead of shaving every 3 or 4 days when I have to for church, if I get up every day and look in that mirror and shave, while I'm looking in that mirror, I can study the person I'm looking at and see what he can do to better serve Jesus. What he can do to better take care of his family. What he can do to try to improve some things. Because at the end of the day, that's my responsibility, is to change some things in me, not to worry about what you guys are doing. And I do, but I'm just saying, not in a judgmental way. I'm not supposed to be judging other people. I've got to judge me and lead by example. So this is what Jacob's doing here. He's saying, look, you're my Lord, I'm your servant. I think he had been focusing on what he could have done differently. And so he's trying to appease his brother. And that's the right approach. Every time we have an issue with our brethren, there's 2 ways you can handle it. You can bow up at them and get ugly, or you can try to reason with them and appease them. Try to show a little grace and mercy with them. So anyway, that's the picture we have here, and I'll move on. He says, thy servant Jacob saith thus, I've sojourned with Laban and stayed there until now. And I have oxen, asses, flocks, men servants, women servants, and I have sent to tell my Lord that I may find grace in thy sight. I also think what he's trying to say is, look, I got my own stuff, and I'll stay in my own place. I'm not going to come and be a burden to you. I'm not going to come and try to take anything else from you. Think about it. Esau looks at Jacob and says, every time I have something, Jacob takes it from me. If I was born first, but he got my birthright. Daddy was going to bless me. He got that. I ain't letting him come here and take anything else. I mean, just imagine from the human standpoint, that might be how you look at it. Jacob says, look, I've got what I need here. And I'm coming to help serve, not to lord over you or take anything from you. I think that's why he worded it the way that he did. He says, I've sent to tell my Lord that I may find grace in thy sight. Verse 6, and the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, we came to thy brother Esau, and also he cometh to meet thee, and 400 men with him. I think about now, I'd be finding the hills somewhere. See, I don't think it bothered me his brother's coming, but that would bother anybody to know he's bringing 400 men. What do they need 400 men for? I can't think. Look, there wasn't but 300 with Gideon. And they whooped all the Midianites with 300 people. So imagine what kind of fight you can get started with 400. I don't know. Sometimes, I want you to hear me for a second. Okay, listen to me. Sometimes God will show you insurmountable odds so that when you overcome them, you'll know who it is that did it for you.
Right.
There was somebody telling me something just recently. I wish I could think who it was. I cannot remember. Somebody was telling me, maybe you, I don't remember. Somebody was telling me just recently about somebody. No, it was Uncle Adrian. I'm pretty sure it was. Telling me a story about somebody that had been hurt. And how he had gotten better and nobody expected him to make it. Right?
The derrick worker.
The guy who fell off a derrick. And they didn't expect him to make it. Sometimes the things that happen to us, while the world may think, man, there's no way you're going to make it through that. God will show us by his power, there's no limit to what he can do.
He went on to be a preacher. That man did.
He lived for a long time. He didn't die any time near when they thought he would. He lived for a long time. So I can't remember all the story, but I remember getting that from it. It just came to my mind, so I thought I'd share it with you. but what I'm saying is 400 men is scary, but if you know what God can do, you ought not let it scare you. Sometimes you'll get your faith tested like that. Sometimes wolves shut the door and things are just, they look impossible. And that's when God shows up. I don't have time to tell the story because I don't want to get away from this. But I will tell you this. There was a time in my life where I was facing something that seemed inevitable. It seemed inevitable. I'd gotten myself in some trouble and it looked like I was headed to prison and I didn't know what I was going to do. I really didn't. I got on my face before God. I fasted for 6 straight days. I didn't eat. Not a bite. Not for 6 straight days. And I prayed as hard as I've ever prayed in my life. Not only did I not go to prison, I don't have any convictions at all.
Praise God.
Traffic stuff, but I mean no convictions. No. I was young and I was stupid and I was about to pay for it and I saw no way out. I've seen with my own eyes what God can do. So 400 people, when you have the faith that we ought to have, shouldn't scare you. But it did, it scared him, and I can understand why. But there's also this little note that he gets. Remember, these messengers come back and they say, hey, we gave your message to your brother, and guess what? He's on his way. He's not waiting there for Jacob to get there. He's coming to meet you, and he's bringing 400 men with him. Verse 7. Then Jacob was greatly afraid. I wished he'd have just trusted God. Some people, they just love this life a little too much. I'm sorry if that hurts your feelings, but that's true. Some people love this life too much. I'm not itching to die. If I was, I'd go stand in the middle of 304 and try this message from there. I don't have a death wish, but I can't wait to get to heaven, y'all. I can't wait. I'm not going to do anything drastic to get there, but I am anxious to see my Savior, to see my grandparents, my mom and my daddy. I can't wait. Some people, though, man, just seem like the slightest little thing scares them after death. Jacob, at this point in his life, he doesn't want to die. He's greatly afraid. And in his defense, some of that may be because he's got a family. Some of that may not be so much him, but just all of the people that would suffer if they get into a battle. So it says he was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people that was with him, and the flocks and herds and the camels, in 2 bands. And I'm not going to explain why he does that because it's in the scriptures. Verse 8. And he said, if Esau comes to the one company and smite it, then the other company which is left shall escape. That verse tells us that in his mind he already believed he knew what Esau's plan was. Remember, he had just got through living through something like this. That's what's crazy about this. He had just lived through this very scenario with Laban. Laban chased him down in record time. Could have killed him. Probably he intended to. God intervened and appeared to him in a dream. And Jacob knows that because Laban told it to him. So he had just lived through a very similar experience. Then he saw the angelic host of God. You would think he'd be, spiritually filled up. He should have been. But again, he had family members and little kids to worry about. There's no telling what all's going on in his mind. But he's scared. So he splits his company in 2 with the hope that if one of them runs into Esau with his murderous intent, somebody will escape and run tell the other group, and then they can try to get away. So that's the hope. Now this is what I like about this. This is what we all ought to do. I wish he had done this before he reacted. I've told you before, there's a difference between reacting and responding. If you go to your doctor and your doctor says, well, you're responding well to treatment. Well, that's a positive thing. That means you're responding and things are going well and it's positive. If you go to your doctor and he says, well, there's a reaction. Immediately, no matter what the reaction is, you know that's negative, right? There's a difference between a response and a reaction. Jacob here's reacting. Instead of responding to the news he got, he gets afraid and distressed and he divides his people. And then he decides to pray. I wish more people would pray first and then respond instead of react and then pray. Which is what most people do. Verse 9, Jacob said, O God, my father Abraham, and God, my father Isaac, the Lord which saidst unto me, return unto thy country and to thy kindred, and I will do well with thee. Remember, he's headed home because God told him to. So in his own way of saying, Lord, I'm doing what you told me to do. I'm following the directive you gave me, and you said you'd be with me. Oh Lord, here comes my brother to kill me. That's what he's saying here. Verse 10. I love this. I am not worthy of the least of all thy mercies, and of all the truth which thou hast showed unto thy servant. For with my staff I passed over this Jordan, and now I am become two bands. Here's what I want you to understand. Jacob realized one thing that he's 100% right about. He's not any more worthy of God's grace and mercy than we are. None of us are. And he's willing to admit that. And I think that's right there. That's one of the reasons I like this being here. When you can kneel before God, and you can admit that you can't do it without Him, and you need Him, and you love Him, and you understand the amazing grace He offers us and the forgiveness He offers us, it'll empower you, and it'll help you. Remember what 2 Chronicles 7:14 says, if my people, which are called by my name, will humble themselves and pray. He's humbling himself. He's already called himself a servant. He's called his brother Lord. He's humbling himself. He's praying here. He's seeking His face. What's the fourth thing you got to do? Turn from your wicked ways. And that's what repent means. Y'all know that? The word repent means to make a change, to turn. Turn away from wickedness. I have a whole message on that sometime. We'll do that another day. He says, I'm not worthy of the least of all your mercies, Lord, or of all the truth that you've shown me. For with my staff I passed over this Jordan. What he means is I came over here by myself. And look what you've done. You've made me two complete bands. He says that because at the moment they're split in two bands. Verse 11, deliver me, I pray thee, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he will come and smite me, and the mother with the children. See, he doesn't think Esau will just kill him. Maybe half of his fear is for that reason. Maybe more. Maybe that's really why he's scared. It's not so much for his own life, because he's getting up there in years. He's got to be 80, 90 years old by now. Because the Bible tells us he was at least 60 when he went to Padan Aram. He was there for 20 years. He's at least 80, maybe 90 by now. Depending on how old he was when he left. We don't know. We just know about. But he's up there in years. Maybe it's not his life he's worried about. Maybe it's his family. Because he makes mention of mother and children. Verse 12. And thou sayest, I will surely do thee good, and make thy seed as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. What Jacob's saying here is, Lord, you made me a promise. You said that my descendants would be so numerous that you can't even count them. Well, Lord, that can't happen if Esau kills every last one of us. So what he's asking for here is, he's reminding God of the promise he made, and he's asking God for mercy, while at the same time accepting the fact he doesn't deserve it. You know, it's okay to ask God for something you know you don't deserve. Because none of us deserve to get saved. But He promised to save us if we'd ask Him. He says, verse 13, He lodged there that same night, and took of that which came to his hand a present for Esau's brother. That means he looked over all that he owned, and he decided, I've got enough here, I can send to give. And I've already counted these up. There's 580 animals that you're going to see here. Let me show you. 200 she-goats, 20 he-goats, 200 ewes, 20 rams, 30 milk camels and their colts, 40 kine, 10 bulls, 20 she-asses, and 10 foals. Kine are cows. I didn't add that up. I had a note on it. It says 580. So I'm not good at math. I'm going to take their word for it. Anyway, he sent a whole bunch of animals. This is a reference, really, to how wealthy he had gotten. Because he can spare that many animals. He still has quite a few. And this is a gift he wants to give his brother. And he divides them into 5 different groups. Watch this. He delivered them into the hand of his servants. Every drove by themselves. He said unto his servants, pass over before me, and put a space betwixt drove and drove. He wants it spread out on purpose. He wants it to appear to his brother like, you know, this is a completely separate caravan. Every one of them is getting. Hoping that over the time it'll take to deliver all these gifts to his brother, that if his brother is mad at him, he'll begin to calm down and change his mind. Verse 17, he commanded the foremost, 'foremost, 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 said, when Esau my brother meets you and asks you, saying, whose art thou, and whither goest thou, and whose are these before thee? Then thou shalt say, they be thy servant Jacob's. It is a present sent unto my lord Esau, and behold, also he is behind us. There's a couple different reasons he does this. First of all, just like he divided into 2 companies, now he's dividing up into 5 more because it's safer. Something happens to any one of those, the rest of them might have a chance to flee and get away. But more importantly, and again, it gives it time. Every time he's got to stop and deal with one of these groups, it gives Esau time to consider and think. But there's something else going on here. See, if Esau only wants to kill Jacob, and we don't know at this point, but, unless you read ahead, you don't know what's going to happen. And I hope most of you do know. But just consider for a moment. At this point in time, Jacob doesn't know what's going to happen. And he knows that if he separates himself alone, and Esau only intends to kill him, then maybe he'll spare all those that come before. That's why the message is when he gets to one of them, hey, these are sent from your brother, they're a gift, he's behind us. So Esau will go to that next group, looking for his brother. And another servant is going to say, this is a gift for you, he's behind us. And he's going to go looking for his brother. And every time he gets to one of these groups, the message is, he's behind us, somewhere back there, keep on going. And if Esau does kill Jacob, which he's not going to, but if he does kill, I'm sorry I spoiled it there, but Esau's not going to kill him, but if he does kill him, everybody that he let live before that, that's a life that got to live. So Jacob's reasoning for doing this is actually pretty smart, if you want to be honest, other than I wish he'd have just had faith and showed up. But we'll come back to that. The Bible says, verse 17, he commanded, verse, where was I? 19? Excuse me. So commanded he the second and the third, and all that followed the drove, saying, on this same manner shall you speak with Esau when you find him. So we've already covered that. Everything he told that first group, he told all 5 groups to do that. Verse 20. And say ye, moreover, behold, thy servant Jacob is behind us, for he said, I will appease him with the present that goes before me, and afterward I will see his face. Peradventure, he will accept of me. Peradventure in the Old English means maybe. Maybe he'll accept. Maybe he won't do what he intended to do. Verse 21. So went the present over before him, and himself lodged that night in the company. Now the reason he lodged that night in the company is because the first messenger that came back and told him Esau was coming, let him know about how far behind him he was. And he's close, y'all. Because he's traveling with just 400 men. He doesn't have flocks. So he's moving pretty quick. But Jacob knows he's got at least one more night. So he stays that night with the company. And he rose up that night. That'd be the next night. He took his 2 wives, his 2 women servants, and his 11 sons, and he passed over the ford Jabbok. Y'all know what Jabbok means? Somebody in here's got a note on it, I promise. Anybody? You know what Jabbok means? It means to wrestle. Y'all know what's coming, right? It means to wrestle. And that means it was named later. It wouldn't have been called that at the time. This hadn't happened yet. Remember, Moses wrote this backwards. So a lot of these names, like Edom, weren't named that yet. Verse 23, he took them and sent them over the brook. Jabbok was the name of the brook. And he sent them over that he had. And Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. Now don't just gloss over that. Hold on a minute. First of all, he took who was with him. It was just his wives and his children. He'd already sent everybody else ahead of him. All that's left is Jacob's wives and his children with him. He sent them over the brook by themselves. And I think that very often when we're struggling with something, I mean something big, like I already told you I've done before, sometimes the best thing you can do is get off by yourself and talk to God. Just be alone with God. So when we come to verse 24, the Bible tells us Jacob is now alone. And there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. Who thinks they know who this man is? And I'm not going to tell you that I know definitively. I'm just going to tell you what I believe the Bible teaches. Who thinks they know who this man is?
The praying
pre-incarnate Christ? That's right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Some people think it was just an angel. I don't think so. I think this is pre-incarnate Christ. I think this is the same man that walked in the fire with the Hebrew children. Or they're not children, but anyway. I think it's the same person. And you'll see why in a minute. Verse 25. When he saw that he prevailed not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh, and the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint as he wrestled with it. There was a Time magazine article. This is funny. Time magazine had an article, this was years ago, back in the 70s or 80s, talking about the greatest wrestler. And they had some people write in and comment on their article, because in their article they said, they listed at the time who the greatest wrestlers were. And I'm not talking about that fake stuff on WWF, WWE. I'm talking about people who really wrestled in the, what do you call it?
Andre the Giant.
No. No.
You wrestle.
I'm talking about the Olympics. Olympic wrestling.
Oh.
I mean people who won medals doing this. Andre the Giant didn't have to wrestle. All he had to do is squeeze your head like that. He was 7 foot tall. Come on now.
Thank you, thank you.
He didn't need to wrestle anybody. That'd be like wrestling a grizzly bear. But Time magazine did an article. Somewhere in the article they said, you know, the greatest wrestler that ever lived isn't even in this list. His name was Jacob. And they had a reader that wrote in and said, who is this Jacob you speak of? Somebody reading the Time magazine article, and the guy was being facetious. I mean, he just put it in there. But the guy who wrote in was serious about it. Who's this guy you're talking about? He had never heard this story because apparently he'd never read it out of the Bible. Well, anyway, so Jacob's probably one of the greatest wrestlers that ever lived. But please understand, it's not that Jacob was that good a wrestler. It's not. If Jesus wanted to, he could just, he didn't even have to touch him. He could have winked at him and then he's out of existence. Poof, you're done. So why do you think they're doing this? Now this is all night long. They start wrestling at night all the way until the next day. And let me point out something else. Does anybody here think Jacob wanted to fight?
No.
He's already run from Laban. He's scared to get into it with Esau. He doesn't strike me as the type that's looking to wrestle. But if this is who I think it is, this is Jesus, who sometimes wrestles with us because we just don't want to give in to his will. We just hold on to things we need to let go of. And the Lord needs us to just surrender. Look, he could have made him surrender. I've told people often, they say, well, if there's a good God out there, why does he let all this bad stuff happen when he could do something about it? He could do this, he could do that. And I know why. I do. I know why. If the Lord fixed it all today, and I'm serious, if he snapped his fingers today, fixed every problem there is, and went back and left us alone, how long do you think it'd be before we messed it all up again? So is it really solving anything if he does it that way? I believe when Jesus created us, he created us specifically the way he did, with free will, because he wanted us to love him and choose to. He wanted people that would love him back and want to. Look, he could make you. He could grab you by the scruff of the neck and say, you're going to love me or else. He could do that. But then it wouldn't be love, would it? I think the Lord's all he's ever wanted is for a people to want him, to love him, serve him, honor him. And he even went first. He gave himself first for us, hoping that we would in turn give ourselves for him and serve him. So as he's wrestling with Jacob, it's not that he couldn't have ended it sooner. I think he was trying to give Jacob an opportunity to quit. An opportunity to say, all right, Lord, you win. I'll do what you want me to do. But see, Jacob's hard-headed. Like a lot of people I know, hard-headed. Anybody that would wrestle with Jesus all night long ought to win an award not for best wrestler, but for hardest head. Really. I mean, a donkey ain't got nothing on Jacob. So he wrestled with the Lord till the breaking of the day. And when he saw that he prevailed not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh, and the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint as he wrestled with him. Y'all, he could have done that a whole lot earlier than he did. He gave him all night long to the breaking of day, and they could have probably done that for several days. Honestly, I think the Lord did what he did out of mercy. Because Jacob probably needed to go get him something to eat and drink by this point. And the Lord didn't. Verse 26, he said, let me go, for the day breaketh. And he said, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me. He said unto him, what is thy name? Now he knew his name. He said, what is thy name? And he said, Jacob. And we talked before about what Jacob means. Verse 28, and he said, thy name shall be no more called Jacob, but Israel. Israel, and I don't have a note here, but I think it means Prince of God. Is that right? Somebody else got a note? Prince of God.
No, it says that. Whereas
What's that?
the next phrase that says that.
Yeah.
Whereas the prince thou hast found.
Right. Well, I know El is a reference to God. So Isra apparently means a prince. He's the prince, a prince of God. He says, look, you're not going to call Jacob anymore because you spend enough of your time trying to trick people and trying to, use your clever ways to accomplish what you want. And now you're going to be known as a prince of God. He says, for as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and hast prevailed. Now, the word prevailed can be misunderstood. If he'd have won, he wouldn't be the one limping away from this deal. I'm just telling you, okay? When you win, you're not the one limping away. But as far as men goes, he had shown some tenacity there. He held in there long. He was hard-headed. Verse 29, Jacob asked him and said, tell me, I pray thee, thy name. Now this is interesting. I think Jacob knew who it was he's wrestling with, but he couldn't believe it. It's like, that can't be who that is. He just had trouble believing it. And you would too. If you found yourself in a wrestling match with Jesus, it'd probably blow your mind too. He says, tell me, I pray thee, thy name. And he said, wherefore is it that thou dost ask after my name? You know what that means in the King James? I mean in regular English? You know what that means? Why do you think you need to know my name? You know who I am. That's what that means. You know who I am. I'd say the same thing if one of my girls asked me what my name was. I'd look at them funny and say, you know my name. You know who I am. Right? That's what he's saying here. Don't let the old English fool you. So wherefore means why. Why is it you're asking after my name? You know who I am. And we know Jacob knew who he was because Jacob said, I'm not letting you go till you bless me. So he knew who he was dealing with. But I think he just needed to hear it. Sometimes I know God's with me, but it does me good to feel His presence. So the Lord blesses him there. Look at verse 30. Jacob called the name of the place Peniel. He said, because I've seen God face to face and my life is preserved. This is why I believe he literally wrestled with Jesus. Because Jesus is God. Verse 31, and he passed over Peniel, and the sun rose up, and he halted upon his thigh. Now there's a reason for that. See, that thing's been knocked out of joint. That means he's not walking right. Okay, that's really all it means. Verse 32, therefore the children of Israel eat not of the sinew which shrank, which is upon the hollow of the thigh, unto this day, because he touched the hollow of Jacob's thigh in the sinew that shrank. Now I'm going to explain more about that, but I'm not going to do it tonight because I don't want to take the time. When we pick up next week in chapter 33, I'll back up these two verses and we'll talk about what that means. But just know this, they still to this day, they practice, well, and I'll tell you about it later, but the things that they do in remembrance of this, they still do because of this. Children of Israel studied this in more in depth than I have. But here's what I want you to take away from this passage. You remember back there when he prayed. I want you to take this with you when you leave here today, okay? Because it always seems like, especially when the world's gone nuts, it always seems like there's an army ahead of us and an army behind us. I mean, it's like we can't win. Like, if I go this way, I got to deal with that. If I go this way, I got to deal with that. Surely I'm not the only one in this room who feels that way a lot of the time. I'll give you a real world experience just for a minute, okay? I've been under some pressure of late to sell our trash business. And I've actually had an offer. I actually got an offer from it, if you want to call it that. It'll do. It will. We're considering it. But there's times when I look at situations like this, like, what do I do? If I let it go, that's an income that I've been counting on for a while.
Right.
We could use that money. On the other hand, I'm not getting any younger. It's a long drive and it's hard on my body. And it's like, what do? How do you know what to do? Sometimes you just feel like, I don't know what to do. And this happens more than you want to admit. Sometimes you just don't know what to do. Do I go yonder way? Do I go back this way? Lord, what do I do? And one of my favorite preachers told me once, he said, Chad, when you don't know what to do what you know to do. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do what I know to do. I'm going to pray and I'm going to seek God's face. Jacob did here. I want to read this prayer again. I want you to take this away and I want you to do this. First of all, verse 9, and I know we read this. I just want to hit it again before we close. Jacob said, "Oh God of my father," recognize who your God is. Okay, there's one God, one and one only. When he said, "God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, the Lord which did say to me, return to my country, to my kindred, and I will deal well with thee." Now, he didn't have to say that long-winded, but he wanted to make absolutely clear who he's talking to, and we need to do that too.
Yes.
Sometimes when we pray to God, we got to make sure we know who it is we're talking to. Here's why I know some of y'all are thinking, wait a minute, what do you mean? We know who we're talking to. Let me be clear. I'm not telling you that there's something wrong with praying while you drive. I'm not saying you can't lay in your bed and pray and get comfortable. That's fine. But sometimes you really need to get on your knees. Just to remind you who it is you're talking to. You're talking to the creator of all things. Almighty God. Sovereign God. They ain't but one. There's a whole lot of little g gods that ain't got no power. There's only one real God. So if he's really who he is, and we know he is, maybe have a little reverence for him when we pray. Especially when you find yourself in a bind. When you don't know what to do, recognize who you're praying to. So that's why he says it that way in verse 9. Then, humble yourself. And really, it's saying the same thing. But it makes a point to say, I'm not worthy of all your mercy. I'm not even worthy of the least of your mercy. I'm not worthy of all the truth you've shown me. Hey, the Lord has given us more truth today. Look at me. More truth today than they had then. Did you know they're walking around without one of those?
Yeah.
They didn't have that. The Lord has revealed more truth to us than they had. And we're not worthy of that either.
Right.
Not worthy of it. There's people who won't even pick that up and read it. They don't know what they got. We're not worthy of that. Or the men that bled and died to deliver it in our hands. We're not worthy of it. Recognize that we're not worthy of His mercy or the truth in His Word. But He gave it to us anyway. His mercy and His truth. Remember what we were and where we are now. He says, look, I passed over alone and now you've blessed me. And He says, deliver me, I pray thee, from the hand of my brother. From the hand of Esau, I fear him, lest he'll come and smite me and the mother of the children. Now, it don't have to be your brother you're scared of. Sometimes it's COVID-19. Sometimes it's cancer. Sometimes it's prison. Sometimes it's a particular bill that you owe. Sometimes it's a family matter, a personal matter. There's all sorts of things that we fear, that we worry about. But the main point of verse 11 is, deliver me, Lord. And in verse 12, He says, you promised you would. You said you'd do good for me. You take care of me. So what I hope you'll take away from this is when you get into a bind, you get into a problem, and you will. Remember who you're talking to, how to talk to Him, and seek Him. The only one that can do anything about it. Any thoughts about this section before we close? You can turn that over.